Want to expand the reach of your content? Start a podcast. Feature industry experts on your show and leverage the influence and reach of your guests to grow your brand. Learn more at sweetfishmedia.com.
You're listening to B2B Growth, a daily podcast for B2B leaders. We've interviewed names you've probably heard before, like Gary Vaynerchuk and Simon Sinek, but you've probably never heard from the majority of our guests. That's because the bulk of our interviews aren't with professional speakers and authors. Most of our guests are in the trenches leading sales and marketing teams. They're implementing strategy. They're experimenting with tactics. They're building the fastest growing B2B companies in the world. My name is James Carberry. I'm the founder of Sweetfish Media, a podcast agency for B2B brands, and I'm also one of the co-hosts of this show. When we're not interviewing sales and marketing leaders, you'll hear stories from behind the scenes of our own business. We'll share the ups and downs of our journey as we attempt to take over the world. Just kidding. Well, maybe. Let's get into the show.
Welcome back to B2B Growth. I'm your host for today's episode, Logan Lyles with Sweetfish Media. I'm joined today by Ed Eppley. He is the owner of the Eppley Group and the author of Let's Be Clear, 6 Disciplines of Focused Management Pros. Ed, how are you doing today, sir?
Very well, Logan. I trust you're doing the same.
I am doing fantastic, sir. I am really excited to be talking about some leading management principles that, no matter if you're leading a marketing team, a sales team, an entire organization, whatever functional role you're in or the size of your organization, you've learned a lot of lessons in what you do with your clients and lessons in your career that are going to be valuable for managers at a lot of different levels that we're going to be talking about today. Before we do that, I would love for you to share a little bit about yourself, your background, why you're the guy talking about management principles today.
I'll be glad to. That's very nice of you to give me a chance to share some thoughts with your audience, Logan. My background is very entrepreneurial. I've had a number of different businesses, advertising agency. I've had my own manufacturer's rep business. And then I was very involved in the training industry with the Dale Carnegie training franchises for a period of time. And I currently do work under the auspices of the Table Group, Pat Lencioni's organization. Many people may know Patrick because of his book, The 5 Dysfunctions of the Team. So I spend a lot of time on organizational health and helping organizations strike the right balance between being effectively smart and also culturally healthy. And then I also serve as an adjunct instructor for Aileron, which is an entrepreneurial organization that helps owners of businesses install professional management in their companies. It was started by the fellow Clay Mattil, who owned, I should say, the Iams pet food companies. If people have pets, they're probably familiar with that. So my job is to help individuals, but more likely executive teams, be able to focus by making things that are complex simple, and oftentimes helping them to have courage to act on things that they probably know they should be doing, but probably are hesitating for a lot of different reasons. And then also we spend a lot of time working on talent and understanding, who are the people that they have in the organization that can be the future of the organization. So that's how I spend a lot of my days.
Yeah, I love that. I know of a lot of organizations and a lot of other leaders that are really striving for focus and simplicity, 2 words that I pulled out from what you were talking about there. No surprise to anyone that myself being a millennial, that those are 2 things I am constantly trying to work on myself. And I know a lot of my peers are as well. I definitely agree with you that Patrick's got some great things to say. Our team went through our monthly book club last fall, The 5 Dysfunctions of a Team. And that book, along with Radical Candor from Kim Scott, were really fundamental in helping us grow our team, set the course for, a new growth stage as we built out the team. And so we're very like-minded in some of the principles that I think you and I can both agree on. One that I'm excited to kick off the conversation on today is how management is like parenting. So I'm a parent of a 7 and 9-year-old. Want to hear your thoughts on this, Ed?
Yeah, I don't know when it first occurred to me that there was a great amount of similarities, Logan, but probably like you, as I was struggling at being an effective manager. And candidly, I think I probably burned out because I wasn't using a lot of the things that I subsequently learned after I was managing and leading 12 salespeople for a period of time in the late 80s and early 90s. And I was also when we were starting our family. And I think there's a level of unconditional love that great managers universally have for their people. And I mean that in the context of doing whatever, unconditional love in the sense of doing what you need to help this person perform at a higher level, regardless of whether it's easy or comfortable for you as the manager. Because as parents, so often we have to sacrifice and do things that we know are in our children's best interest, that really there's no immediate gratification for us as parents. And you could even argue that a lot of times our kids don't even appreciate that we're doing it until way, way, way later, if at all. And, now that our kids are 33 and 31, we start to hear occasionally that we did some things correctly. But, as I hate to tell you this, but as yours reach the teenage years, you're going to become pretty stupid, I think.
Right. Well, at least there's light at the end of the tunnel that, when my kids are the age I am now, that maybe if I've done as good a job as you with your kids, Ed, then I'll have some affirmation coming back my way.
Like your odds.
Thank you for that. So one thing in what you said there, Ed, reminded me of something a manager once told me is, his philosophy, especially in sales, where, it really is this meritocracy. It is the results, just like in sports.
Yeah.
If you're not producing for your team, it's clearly there. There's a scoreboard, there's a stat sheet, those sorts of things. And one manager gave me the advice, and that was this, that, they are the person for the role until they're not. Don't act out of, mistrust that they're not working or not putting forth the effort until you're sure that they're just not the fit. And then you move on there. And so that unconditional love in the managerial sense was that, you place the trust and you equip them until it's not a good fit. You don't live in this middle ground. What would you say to that advice, Ed?
I think it's astute that you're bringing it up, and that's another way to think of how it's relevant to being a parent. The very best managers and leaders, a couple of whom I speak about in my book, let's be clear, one of their common characteristics is if you're on their team, then you are all the way on their team, and their loyalty to you and their confidence in you is unquestioned. And it stays that way until it isn't. So I think that's a very common characteristic of above average leaders, but it is not the norm. So, there's a disproportionate few people who are the above average leaders. So that's probably, the top 20%. But the majority of those people, I would say that if you're on their team, then they're going to be all the way in for you, and it won't be conditional.
Yeah, I love that. So really, those dynamics of how you set out, trust and support in your team influence culture. And one of the other things I know you talk about regularly, Ed, is this idea of two sets of rules when it comes to your culture of an organization or a team within a larger organization. And that is the written and unwritten rules. Talk to us a little bit about the contradiction there, possibly, and working within the context of both of those as a manager.
I think that, so many organizations want to check the box. So many executives, owners, presidents want to check the box and get their purpose and mission and vision values out there, and believe that when they do that, that they are, putting the building blocks in place for a really effective culture that will attract and retain above average talent. And unfortunately, that's not the case. In fact, most organizations that have these statements on the walls and plastered everywhere in sight, whether it's on the desktops or wherever, a lot of times they don't have those cultures that we really would want to be a part of. And what I've found is that the unwritten rules, by the way, the written rules also reside in the employee handbook, which are a series of thou shalt nots. But after you look at the written statements of how you shall behave, and the way you need to align yourself with the rest of the organization, and are the written rules for what you won't do, still the number one thing that most influences people is what they see in the behavior of the people who are at the top of the organization. And you can think about any company of which you've been a part, Logan, but there has been unwritten rules for how you will behave. If you want to get along here, if you want to be in the good graces of the upper echelon of the organization, there's certain things you do and that you don't do, but they're not written down anywhere.
Right. Absolutely. I can tell you in being part of, several different organizations of different sizes, that's true no matter where you go. And those written rules really come out of, the behaviors of the manager, because, it ties back to your first point of managing being like parenting. One thing I know about kids is they will watch what you do as much, if not more, than what they listen to what you say, right? And so thinking about that in the context of management actually reinforces your first point.
Yeah, and I think the other part of unwritten rules, more than anything else, I think you see people watch what the leader does when someone fails. When somebody screws up, either, an error in good conscience, an error of commission, trying to do the right thing, but it wasn't either done well or wasn't done at the right time. Watching how that person handles that mistake really sends powerful signals about, how much risk I'm going to take, how much I see that you're, encouraging people and sticking by them no matter what, and believing in people. And when those things are not present, I don't care how well written the mission, vision, purpose will be, or the values are articulated, people's whole heart won't be in it because they know they're following somebody who's really not modeling what probably is written down.
So, Ed, if we go on from there and we talk about this equation that you've talked about before, which is skill times effort equals results, how do you look at applying that or thinking about that as a manager leading a team, thinking about, the output you're looking for from your team as well as from yourself as a manager?
All right, I want to build a picture in the mind of your listeners, if I can, Logan, that first and foremost, when you think about any manager's job at any level, so again, lowest level to highest level, there are two primary reasons why that person has a job. One aspect of their job is to produce a set of results that is, would be typical for that scope of authority. And then the second responsibility they have is to grow your people. And when we say grow your people, what we're really saying is improving their productivity year over year. When you say to most people, I need you to become more productive, that's not what they hear. What they hear is somehow that they're failing, or they oftentimes will hear they need to work harder. But what we're really asking them to do is to get about 3 to 5% more productive, where they get 3 to 5% more output for the same amount of energy or effort or input. And that's not an arbitrary number. Peter Drucker spoke about the fact that every company is going to see a higher cost of doing business every year by about 3 to 5%, no matter how hard they try to hold down their fixed cost of doing business. So if somebody next year does the same amount of work that they did this year with the same amount of level of output, but we've given them a cost of living increase, we lost money on that transaction. And so what we then as a manager have to do just to stay even with the cost of doing business is to have everybody that we manage and lead, including ourselves, become more productive, so that the equation that I have in my book of skill times effort equals result is really focusing on the premise that you have two variables that you can affect that get a higher result. One is to use the same level of skill, but apply it over a longer period of time to get a better outcome. Or more ideally, what we want to do is improve the skill. And so with the same amount of effort or time, or even less time, we get the same or better result than we otherwise would get. And that's really an area where most managers don't spend nearly enough time, is working with, thinking about, and planning for how they'll get each of their people to be more productive.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. You've got to keep up with that rising cost of doing business. And I love what you're pointing out there, Ed, in, really differentiating the skill versus effort, because as you mentioned, when you ask people to produce more, they can easily interpret that as they need to do more. They need to put in more effort. But we all know that there's a law of diminishing returns. We are, humans. We have a life expectancy. We have a certain, max that we can handle physically, emotionally, mentally in each year and each work week, really. And so thinking about that as a manager and casting that vision down that we are trying to get better. And, it's not all this huge uphill battle, because as you grow as an organization, there's more institutional knowledge, technology advances. There are ways to increase your skill as an organization and that of your team without, just seeming like it's hopeless. So I think drawing that distinction of what you're asking of the folks that you lead is really important. And that's a great picture for it. One of the other things I think we have to make time for, Ed, in what we've talked about today for, really high level managers to do well. And that is to create a stop doing list. As you and I were talking about this offline, I've heard other leadership voices in my life, like Craig Groeschel. I'm a big fan of his leadership podcast. He talked about something similar to what you referred to recently as stop doing lists. Tell us a little bit about this concept and where effective managers bring it into their day to day.
I got to give credit where it's due. Jim Collins in Good to Great is the first time that I read the premise of a stop doing list. So it's not my idea, but I sure love it. And the idea is that there is a large amount of activity that goes on in any organization that shouldn't be done by anybody. And so the only way to uncover that is to initially just look at the work that's currently being done by yourself or your team and collectively come up with an agreement of there's certain things we're going to stop doing because they really don't contribute to the results that we're producing or supposed to produce in our area. That may mean that it's going to have to get done by somebody else or it needs to get done in a different way. But ultimately, you're pushing to get someone else to either do it or not. More ideally is to not do it at all. Drucker, again, one of the things he said is that the highest levels of improvement in productivity don't come from changing anything. They come from not doing something, getting rid of it. And so Jim Collins is really on to something when he talks about that stop doing list. One of the things you have to do is if you say, I'm going to stop doing certain things and it still has to get done, well, then you need to push that down into the organization below you and put that on somebody else's plate. At some point, they're going to say, well, I don't have time to do it, which is a great opening for you to say, great, we're going to help you create a stop doing list. So that you have time to do this, we'll have to take something else off of your plate. They, in turn, may have to push that down further in the organization. But if you do that often enough, eventually you'll find certain things that shouldn't be done by anybody. And the studies I've read and seen indicate there's 5 to maybe 8% of the work that's going on in any business that shouldn't be done by anybody. And it's not that people are stupid, but it's probably work that was valuable 3, 5, 8 years ago, but it's no longer valuable today. And because you haven't pruned the bush, it continues to occupy people's time and attention.
Yeah, that is a great analogy for it, that it takes pruning over time. I love that,
Yeah.
Ed. So we've talked about, keeping this in mind, that management is like parenting in the way that you need to, instill trust as a leader with the team that you lead. And really that dovetailed into really your second point of the unwritten rules of the culture and the power there. The equation that we referred to, the skill times effort equals results. The point there that you made of, we've got to be 3 to 5% more productive year over year just to keep up with the rising cost of doing business, let alone grow, needs to be in our minds. But how we communicate that down to our team can have an effect on how it's interpreted. And then, this idea of stop doing lists, both for yourself as a manager and for your direct reports. I love all of these principles that you're talking about for people to really excel, no matter the size of team that they're managing and leading. Ed, if anybody listening to this would like to follow up on this conversation, ask follow-up questions of you, stay connected, or find your book, what's the best way for them to reach out or find you?
Well, I am on LinkedIn, and I'm actually posting a lot of stuff there daily or almost daily about my thoughts about management and leadership, organizational health, and professional management. My website is the Eppley Group. That's all one word, EPPLEY. And I also have would encourage people to visit there, and I've made a landing page for B2B so that they can listen to this if they'd like to. There's also at my website a PowerPoint that I've got created that's talking about the whole idea about why purpose matters today, and more so than ever, especially to people under the age of 40. If people are interested in thinking more about how they get purpose embedded into their organization. And of course, if people are interested in wanting to buy my book, let's be clear, the 6 disciplines of focus management pros, there's a link there that they can go to Amazon and do that. And also there's an assessment if they'd like to test themselves in terms of how well they measure up in each of those 6 disciplines. And I'd welcome people to reach out and connect with me.
I love it. Ed, thank you so much for joining me today. I've really enjoyed this conversation. Like we said at the top of the interview, we're like-minded on several points, and I appreciate you sharing some wisdom with listeners today.
Logan, thanks for being disciplined and getting these podcasts out to so many people so regularly. You do a great job, and you're helping be a good resource to these managers and leaders. Lord knows we all need it. Thanks so much.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for your time today, Ed. Really appreciate it.
You too.
We totally get it. We publish a ton of content on this podcast, and it can be a lot to keep up with. That's why we've started the B2B Growth Big Three, a no-fluff email that boils down our 3 biggest takeaways from an entire week of episodes. Sign up today at sweetfishmedia.com/big3. That's sweetfishmedia.com/big3.